biggest challenges she'll face is one the current president plans to confront this week. My New Year's resolution is to move forward on our unfinished business as much as I can. That's especially true for one piece of unfinished business: our epidemic of gun violence. That's why Obama spent today meeting with Attorney General Loretta Lynch to talk about moves he can make on his own without Congress. He's expected to announce executive action on expanded background checks this week, but will it hold up in the courts? Joining me to talk about that and more are Martha Coakley, the former Attorney General of Massachusetts. She's now at Foley Hoag. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
And Jennifer Braceras is an opinion editor at NewBostonPost.com. And they're both alums, I don't know what it means, of Shakespeare and the law. And
you don't want to know.
I don't want to know. Martha, let me start with you. Does the president have the power to do what we believe he's going to be doing tomorrow or the next day?
I think if he is able to close some loopholes on background checks, and he is obviously doing his research. You know, he did a bunch of these executive orders back in 2013, different buckets of things: background checks, better preparedness for local police, etc., school resource officers. They all withstood challenge. So it depends on what he does, but I'm sure they're looking very carefully at what they will do that will withstand challenge in the courts.
Can you explain one more thing to me before we get to Jennifer? Rather than blaming Republicans in Congress for blocking any congressional action, why didn't he do something when he controlled both houses with Nancy Pelosi and Senator Reid? He had control of the House and the Senate when he became president. There were mass shootings then. Why didn't he do it then?
You'd have to ask him, obviously. But, you know, I think
I can answer that.
He was focused on health care. He was focused on a lot of other issues. And I think he knew that he wasn't going to be able to get that passed.
What's your answer?
Well, I agree with Martha that he wasn't going to be able to get it passed because contrary to what most people will tell you, this is not necessarily a Republican or Democratic issue. There are a lot of Southern Democrats or more conservative Democrats, rural Democrats, that will not vote for legislation to restrict guns. So
as we learned from the failure of the moderate Toomey Manchin compromise just a couple of years
Correct.
ago. Yeah.
So I think that first of all, he wouldn't have been able to, but second of all, it's a lot more fun to blame Republicans than to blame your own party.
Well, let's blame Republicans for a second if we can.
It is a divisive issue, and it does fall on party lines in many respects.
You've seen the new Quinnipiac poll. Well, in all fairness, a majority of the American people do not support more gun laws. When they're asked specifics, 9 in 10, including more than 80% of Republicans, say we should expand and have universal background checks. So the Republicans are not just thwarting the president, they're thwarting the will of the American people, including their own party, aren't they?
Yes and no. As you say, it depends how the question's asked. I think theoretically most people don't object to background checks, but when you ask the same demographic of people who like background checks, typically wealthier suburban voters, if they would want, for example, their son or daughter in a database of quote-unquote mentally ill people who can't own a gun because they've been prescribed medication for OCD, the answer will be no.
Yeah, but they opposed all and any changes to background checks, even if they could craft them. But let me get back to you for a second. You know, when you look at the most recent mass shootings, you know this to be the case. Almost all the weapons were gotten legally. Correct. So while this is something that obviously 80 to 90% of the people support, what does it actually achieve other than a new law?
Well, we also know we're never going to prevent all of these. And so you're looking at what are the risks involved. The risks are making sure you try and keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. I think people agree with that. The rubber meets the road, though, is where that line gets drawn. Mm-hmm. And there are charges being brought against the guy who got those guns in the San Bernardino shooting. So they're looking very closely at that.
In this case, yeah. Very quickly before we move on, is there any I shouldn't call it gun safety for these. Any further gun control legislation the Republicans in Congress would support anything at all?
You know, here's the thing, and you know, Jim, we've talked about this before. I'm not a big gun person.
No,
and were I a member of Congress, I would support gun legislation. However, I think a lot of Republicans look at this in the same way that they look at climate change. It's not as if they don't think this is a problem. It's that they don't think the costs outweigh the benefits, and the benefits outweigh the costs, rather, and they don't think that the measures proposed will solve the problem.
Well, they haven't proposed any of that, but let's move on. Today marks the third day a group of armed militia members, some are calling them terrorists, are occupying a federal building at a wildlife refuge in Oregon. It all started, you probably know this, with a peaceful protest in support of some local ranchers facing jail time for arson. Now the armed occupiers are demanding the federal government give the land back to local ranchers.